showing the moment that an ICE agent fired his weapon in what ICE says was self-defense. For more on that, let's bring in Carrie Irvine.
Welcome to this special episode of Inside Trial Minds, where we dive deep into the minds of our nation's top-ranked attorneys, how they think, how they fight, and how they ultimately win their cases. Today's case is a special one. We are unfortunately covering the in-time shooting of a woman in Minnesota by an ICE agent. We will be discussing this with Vince Collela. He is joining us today over Zoom to discuss this very sensitive situation.
Elvis, how you doing today?
I'm doing very good. Vince, as a trial attorney who works on these type of cases, what is your take on the situation?
Well, first of all, this is a tragedy, and I'm sorry that we even have to do a segment like this. We should never have to do segments like this. We should never be talking about citizens being gunned down by police officers or federal agents. So first and foremost, my heart goes out to Renee Good and her family. We're here today because a certain federal agent failed to follow his own protocol, the protocol of the department that he works for. And he did not follow police tactics that are acceptable in this country. And because of that, a woman is dead. That's why we're here today.
Gotcha. Now, some people argue that because she backed up, and that's when the officer was standing in front of her car and he went forward. The argument is that he should not have been standing in front of the car. But from some angles, he was off to the passenger side of the vehicle until she backed up. I'm not sure. I think that has actually been debunked because of another angle of the camera, that he was already in front of the car. But which part of his training was failed? Like, is he not supposed to, are police not supposed to stand in front of vehicles, or, well, where did he mess up?
Well, that's true. But we have to back up a moment, because this case, this incident, this encounter did not start with that officer in front of the vehicle. It started with that officer. Now that more video is coming out, and this is the point of an investigation. This is why an administration shouldn't jump to conclusions about what took place. This is why, the powers that be, vice presidents and Secretary Noem, should not be out in front of this, creating a narrative when there should be an objective investigation that is looking into the facts of this case. And what we've learned over the last couple of days is that this officer, for whatever reason, hopefully we'll learn soon, was circling the car with his camera out, photographing all of the angles of this vehicle. And I'm not certain as to why. And during that time, Renee Good's wife, Becca, was actually following him and videotaping him on her phone. And what's interesting about that scenario is that as they were circling around to the rear of the vehicle, while this officer, Jonathan Ross, was videotaping the license plate, Becca says to him, "Hey, you know where we live. You know how to find us. In other words, we're not going anywhere. You know who we are because you now have our license." And then he continues around. And at that point, we see the other vehicle pull up. Two of the ICE agents exit their vehicle in a very aggressive manner and then approach the car, giving her what I believe to be very confusing commands. And we have the video right here. We can break it down if you want, but those are the circumstances that lead up to this officer being in front of that vehicle. I think there's something else that's very important to understand here, because when we're looking at this case in the context of qualified immunity, in other words, whether this officer is immune from prosecution, we have to look at what's called the totality of the circumstances. And one of the factors that a court will eventually look at, I just lost this here, that a court will eventually look at is, what was the crime? What was the crime that was being committed? And in this case, because they're yelling obstruction of justice under this federal rule that they're all citing, and they've done this across the country. What investigation was ongoing? Were they chasing a subject? Were they canvassing the neighborhood to get statements about some crime that was committed? Why were they there? What were they doing? Or was this just a quasi-military occupancy of a portion of Minneapolis?
So, from what I've understood over the past 48 to 72 hours of this situation, I don't know if it's been 3 days, but regardless, what I've understood from the situation was that they were there in the neighborhood arresting a gentleman that they had a warrant out for. I believe he's a criminal alien, but not just because he was here legally, but because he had domestic violence situation to him. Don't quote me on that. That's just through the grapevine. That's what I've heard they were there for. And then there was an interview with a woman after the situation who said that the reason they went after her car specifically, because in a longer clip, you see that another car, there was a ICE vehicle that stopped, a car in front of hers leaves, that ICE vehicle continues on. She stopped because that ICE vehicle drove in front of her, and she and went. And then the next ICE vehicle, which was the silver one that pulled up to give her the commands to get out of the vehicle, the reason they were going after her specifically was because supposedly she was leading the caravan of cars that were there to obstruct. And that's why her wife was outside of the vehicle, because people were following ICE around and then trying to bother them while they're doing whatever it is they're doing. And that's why they were there. So I believe that was the prerequisite for why they wanted her out of her vehicle versus any of the other cars that were also there in their way.
Well, let's assume that, and I don't know any of that to be true. That's what we're now being told about the scenario. But the fact of the matter is that there are pursuits, right, that we see where there is a suspect that is on the run, and police officers are attempting to detain or capture the subject to make an arrest.
Mm-hmm.
And there are investigatory pursuits where they are canvassing an area in hopes of finding witnesses or potentially the subject. There was nothing about this scenario that told me that this was a hot pursuit whereby a pedestrian obstructed the police from making a detention or stopping the potential subject. There was nothing about this scenario that suggested that. This to me looked like a military occupation. This to me looks like a quarantining of a neighborhood for purposes of perhaps that included looking for some subject who may have committed a crime, and who may not have been here lawfully in the country.
So, in that situation, would it make a difference if because from to your point, they don't seem to be in any particular hurry, or there's no sense of urgency from anybody in the situation before the shooting, right?
Correct.
The police cars are the ICE vehicles are driving off at a slower pace. The officer who fired the gun was casually walking around the vehicle. There's no sense of urgency from anybody. So if they were there to arrest somebody, just by the body language of everybody in the situation, you would assume that they had already collected the guy that they were looking for, and they were on their way somewhere else, or at least canvassing the area for any further people. Does it make a difference if it was before or after that warrant arrest that they were going for?
Well, and a lot of times when I'm looking at cases, what I like to do is I like to try to get in the minds of the people that are involved in an incident. Okay. let's take your scenario, for example, and let's say that the person that they were looking for had been detained or captured or taken into custody. And now you have the aftermath of that, and you have ICE agents in the field who perceive what they'll call a caravan. I may say just a number of protesters that were maybe aligned with their vehicles in a certain way, whatever that may be. They were not happy about that. Whatever you want to call this situation, the ICE agents were not happy about being filmed. They were not happy about being followed. They were not happy about being watched. And they certainly were not happy that people were blowing whistles in their presence to alert others that they were there in the neighborhood for the obvious reasons. And that attitude, I guarantee you, melts into the conduct and the actions of this officer and the other two that approached the vehicle. These are not just, this isn't the situation that we would see on TV in the 1970s where the police officers were collegial, they would speak to people in the community, they were peace officers, they were keeping the peace. This is not this does not reflect that. This reflects very aggressive, angry actions because they don't like being defied as the authority, especially when they believe they're given presidential authority to be in that neighborhood to do what they will. And that attitude and that consciousness of we are here with impunity and you are not to be in our way is probably what resulted in them going from a zero situation to 100 miles an hour in a split second.
Yeah, that particular officer in question, I believe the vice president may have put this information out there. Somebody put the information out that he was involved in a car ramming previous while on the job, and he had to get stitches and he was beat up. Could that be you? Because I'm sure if this goes to trial, right, both sides would be able to use that to their defense. Hey, on the side of the ICE agent, he's been run over before, which put him in a more likely position to act more aggressively in the situation where he believes he'll be run over again. And then on the plaintiff side or the family's defense side, hey, you got a guy who has PTSD from getting run over out in the field. That's why did you do that? So is that an argument for either side, and which side would it be stronger for?
So yeah, so what that is if you're defending this case, if the federal government's defending this case and they want to admit that evidence of a previous encounter where this officer got hurt, as a mitigating factor to allow the jury to consider the fact that this officer was prone to being overly zealous in a situation because he's already been injured. Okay. Now, first of all, I don't believe if you're in the legal analysis of this case under the qualified immunity standards, we approach this case objectively. It's not the subjective beliefs of the officer. The question is, would an objectively reasonable officer under the same circumstances have reacted in this way? And so if an officer is predisposed to being overly aggressive because of their history, their psychology, their experiences in life, that does not give them an excuse. It may be an explanation, but it's certainly not a legal justification for their actions. And so for that matter, I do not believe, it's going to be admitted. I think it would be kept out of court. I think a motion would be filed because it's irrelevant and it does not shed any light on this particular situation in terms of the objective reasonableness. And secondly, I don't think that it really matters in this case because And if in fact this office, maybe it would even gravitate, like you suggested, in favor of the family, because now you have an officer who's maybe shown poor tactical training and poor tactical experiences in the field, which is now being repeated again in a situation close in time. It's like, what did this officer know? How was he trained? Why didn't he learn from that experience? And why did he put himself in the same position again?
So, gotcha. So the other aspect of it is, did he get hit? Did he not get hit? Does it make a difference if the vehicle touched him or not?
Well, based on the video, I don't believe that there is sufficient evidence to suggest that he was hit. What there is sufficient evidence of is that, and we can look at the video for a moment here, and I'll see if I can
Which
start.
angle you looking at?
We're gonna start. This is the New York Times put together a 3 minute and 57 second segment, which is a conglomeration of a number of camera angles and videos that were taken at the scene by bystanders, by the officer himself. I'm not certain if this includes body camera or not. I'm not sure that the body worn camera video has been released yet. But what we do have are a number of angles here to be able to look at. And what I want to do is I want to preface looking at this with the following statement, that when this officer, Ross, transitioned to his firearm, his sidearm, sorry, with his right hand, he reaches up, he points it directly at the driver's side window, which is where the driver is, where Renee Good's head is, and leans into it as she begins to pull forward. So with the body leaning forward, because he's trying to get a closer shot on her, trying to be point blank, naturally his hips move backwards, his body hunches forward, and from a distance, which was what the first video that we saw in this case, it looks like, oh, he's hit because he's moving, he's hunched forward. But now that we've broken down the video, it's clear that that movement was voluntary because he was actually pointing the gun closer to get a closer range shot of her through that front windshield. And you can see it here. Boom. Now,
You said this was
right
for
here, this one right here, when he transitions to his firearm, you can see him lean over the front of the hood, but his legs are actually to the side, his feet. And when the first fire shot goes off, you can see he is clearly not in the path. And then the next two shots, he's turned, he's tracked, and he continues to fire. This case is reminiscent of a case I handled in 2016. The woman's name was Janet Wilson. She was leaving a local mall here in Detroit, in Dearborn, Michigan. And she was accused of getting into a verbal altercation at a sunglass store, leaving the sunglass store and then having an altercation with security guards, getting into her car and running off in a high rate of speed out of the parking lot. Those security guards claimed that she tried to run them over, and the local police were contacted. When she eventually got out into the street, the traffic had backed up and she had stopped. That's when the officers behind her got out of the vehicle and they went to surround the car. Just like in this case, two of the officers approached from the driver's side, neither one of which drew their firearm, and another officer went around to the front passenger side over the front headlamp of the passenger portion of the vehicle, and he drew his firearm. And while she was stopped, because the vehicles in front of her were stopped, they started yelling all these commands at her. Get out, stop, do this. They were very confusing. She happened to also be mentally ill. She was panicked. And the way that they approached this vehicle was completely chaotic and reminiscent of what we see here. The difference is that the officer in my case was to the right of the vehicle, whereas this officer was to the left. And when the vehicle in front of my client's car began to move forward, this officer who's to the right of the vehicle began firing through the side of the window and killing her. And what happened was exactly the same. The minute those shots were fired upon her, she involuntarily pressed the gas and rammed into the car that was probably at that point 50 feet or so in front of her, which is what happened here. Because what the reason that police officers are taught never to shoot into a vehicle is because in this case, there's danger of crossfire between the officers and shooting each other, number one. But more importantly, once a person has been hit by a bullet, they involuntarily can clinch, tense, and press the gas. And what happens is there's no control of the vehicle. And if there's any pedestrians, bystanders, et cetera, in the area, they are all at risk. And that's why we don't do it. That's why we don't teach that. That's why officers are not taught to do that.
So my question then, because for us, we can watch the video back in slow-mo. We can see if the car was, which way the wheels were turned. We can see all these things because we have all these different vantage points. To the ICE agent's defense, he doesn't have these vantage points, right?
I would disagree with that, Elvis. Not only does he have the vantage points, but he has them in real time, and he's without a lens, and he's looking. He's within inches of the vehicle, looking into the vehicle.
What I mean is, yeah, I would say he doesn't have the vantage point of which way the wheels are turning. He has, from his perspective, a car is coming forward.
Well, that's not exactly accurate because he's got the vantage point of the way that she's steering the car.
Yeah.
And when he is at the point where he's standing in front of her and she puts the car into drive, she immediately starts turning the wheel to the right and he starts moving to the left. And so for that reason, yes, he wasn't focused on the tires, but he is looking at the steering wheel, and it's clear from one of the videos that was shown here, which may be, by the way, his own cell phone before he transitioned to his firearm.
Yeah,
he's turning the wheel to the right.
I was gonna say that I did see his video when he's circling the car. Now I don't know if the phone was shaking from the ordeal or from any sort of side swipe or impact. But from his video, it sounded like the car did at some point at least graze him. And from the second video that came out, the first video came out was on the ground level from her side of the vehicle. And then there's one like from way far away that looks like she sideswiped him at the very least. If there's another angle that comes out that shows more clearly than any of the ones that we have now that the vehicle did come in contact with him, does that clear him anything, or does it change anything?
So let's first of all, you have to have a fundamental understanding of how the courts look at how they analyze these cases. They analyze the cases based on a segmental approach, meaning that every single bullet has to be accounted for and has to be justified. If in fact the car made any contact with him, okay, and then and after that contact, he is now out of the path of the vehicle and begins firing, that is an unjustified use of deadly force. If he continues to fire as the vehicle is rolling past him, that is an unjustified use of deadly force. And if he turns to continue to track her and shoot while the vehicle is now passing away from him, that is an unjustified use of deadly force. And that's where he's going to have the biggest problems, both in the criminal context and in the civil context, because all three shots, at least in my opinion, and when I'm looking at the video, and I invite everybody to watch the videos, because don't take my word for it, he is to the left of the vehicle and not in the path at the time that the shots are fired.
Gotcha. So there is So from my understanding of that, it would be because the first bullet, or at least one of the bullets, went through the front windshield.
Yes.
Uh,
Then there's a great picture of it, and it's if we're looking at the windshield here,
so
uh,
more bottom.
yes, it's right where it would be direct in line with where the steering wheel would be.
Yeah. So from my understanding, the first bullet, if he's standing in front of the vehicle, if the first bullet came when he got hit in front of the vehicle, or if he got hit in front of the vehicle, um, that would be the only one that has any potential of justification. The two that came through the driver window would, if any of them are going to be justified, the only one that has a potential for justification would be the one that came through the front windshield if he in fact was standing in front of the vehicle when that went through there, is my understanding.
If
So
that were the case, but I don't.
if that were the case, if that
Yeah,
were the
if
case,
that were the case, if she was accelerating at him and he was firing at her to stop that vehicle from striking him, yes, under that circumstance, that would be, I would think that a court would say the officer was justified.
but the second two that came through the driver's side, which would have been after any potential hitting, those are the ones that, even if the first shot was justified, those next two would not be.
Reminds me of another case that I had for a 20-year-old boy that was shot and killed by a Royal Oak police officer here in Detroit. The boy, and I'll save you from the entire story, but the critical moments was that the boy was on his hands and knees in a worshiping position on the ground with the officer standing above him with the gun pointed directly at him, and he got up and he started to run. And the first bullet struck the boy, my client, in the left shoulder, and the next three bullets were fired directly into his back, meaning that, and the officer said that from the moment that the boy started to move towards him, he started backpedaling and firing center mass and never stopped. Well, that was impossible because we know forensically all three of the bullets in his back were directly in his back. And my experts, through forensic pathology, established and proved that the officer had to have turned, tracked, and continued to fire as the boy was running away. That's similar to what we would see, what I think is here, although it's a little not as clear because we don't have the shots directly to the back, but we do have shots to the side of the vehicle as the vehicle's passing. Well, I guess my point is that officers are not permitted to turn and track and continue to shoot a fleeing suspect. That's deadly force that is unjustified, period.
Something just came to
Sure.
mind, that I realized that in the question about the bullets, we're generally assuming that of which ones actually hit her. Um, if the first bullet through the front didn't hit her, right? Say that one missed and hit the headrest because she was turning, and then the ones that actually killed her were the subsequent two shots. How does that affect the case?
Yeah, so that's where the forensic pathology comes in. They're going to do bullet trajectories. They're going to look at the medicine, the medical. They're going to do an autopsy. They're going to break all this down. Obviously, if the first shot missed and the second two are the ones that were the fatal firing bullets, the officer would have a much more difficult time because he can't rely on that first shot and say, well, I was justified there. Well, that shot didn't result in her death. The other two had resulted in her death when you were clearly out of the way of danger. She didn't pose an imminent danger. Another thing that you need to understand, we need to discuss here, and I haven't heard anyone talk about this, is that it's not just danger to the officers, danger to anyone in the immediate vicinity. And when you look at all these videos, one of the challenges for the officer and the government is going to be here is that there were no bystanders or pedestrians in front of her car. The only person that could arguably state that they were in danger was federal agent Ross. And if the videos dispel that, he's not going to have much of a defense here.
That was actually going to be my next question. Could he claim that the subsequent two shots to the side were to prevent her from ramming into anybody else who could be in her line of
Yeah,
traffic?
so I'm not going to get too far into the weeds about what the Eighth Circuit Court of Appeals has said about that, but every state is part of a federal appellate district. Okay, Minnesota falls within the Eighth District, Eighth Circuit, excuse me, and the cases that I've reviewed over the last couple of days coming out of the Eighth Circuit, a lot of them involve officers shooting at vehicles that are in high-speed chases in areas of, residential subdivisions, cities, places where people are at danger and at risk, and that vehicle has to be stopped. And in those cases, the court says the officers have qualified immunity because the vehicle and the person in it that's driving at the high rates of speed in an area where there's pedestrians is creating an imminent danger for those in the area. And under those circumstances, the court says the officer has immunity. This is not the case here, right? Because there were no bystanders, there were no pedestrians, and there were no other motor vehicles that could have been in danger.
Gotcha. I want to shift over to who has a claim to uh, any lawsuit in this case. Is the suit, I'm assuming, would be a wrongful death uh,
Yeah,
case?
it would be what's called a Bivens action, and that's a federal case against the officer, just like when a case would be filed against a state officer under 1983, which is the federal civil rights statute, and the Fourth Amendment of the Constitution as well. The persons that would be entitled to take would be the family members, right? The people in this case, I believe she's got three children. She's married, so her spouse, the three children, perhaps her parents, and anyone else that has a family relationship that suffered the loss of what we call consortium, the loss of love, society, companionship, right? I would My guess would be with three children and a spouse, the lion's share of any compensation would be awarded to those people, to the
And
kid and the spouse,
so,
and perhaps her parents as well.
so her spouse, who was the woman on the other side of the vehicle from the from the ICE agent who shot's camera, can be
Hmm.
seen like trying to open the door, but obviously it was locked, so neither the ICE could open nor her wife could open. But after that, we hear her yell out, "Drive, drive, drive!" Right?
Yeah.
It would that affect uh not on the legal side of it, her being liable for any criminal action and by just yelling at her to drive, but on the recovery side of it, could it be argued that she pushed her to act in a way that got her killed, and maybe her reward or recovery from that wrongful death would be less or none at all because of her part in the situation?
Well, so in personal injury cases, whatever the variety is, whether it's an auto accident, whether it's a slip and fall, and in a case involving a shooting, the person bringing the claim, if they are negligent in any way, the amount of damages could be reduced by the percentage of their own fault. So, and I'm not sure what the Minnesota law is with respect to that. In Michigan, we've got what's called a modified comparative negligence standard, meaning that if a person is more than 50% at fault for their own injury, they can't recover at all. Some states have a pure model, which means you reduce by the total percentage of fault, and that could go down to 1%, but then the 1% would be attributable to the tortfeasor, the person who caused the injury. So, not to get too far into the weeds about that, but if an argument could be made that yelling "drive, drive, drive" was a contributing factor to her wife's death, then arguably there could be some reduction in her damages. but
Gotcha.
not for the children because the children
Yeah,
are.
I was gonna say, would it be better for the family to uh if they're going to file any sort of suit to leave the wife out of it for that reason? Because there is an
I don't.
interview.
I don't think so. Again, you would have to. There's a concept called proximate cause,
Mhm,
and to our knowledge, there's no evidence that that Ms. Good
mhm.
had began to move away from the officer because of the words that were being spoken by her wife. I mean, that's pure speculation. So
So
I don't think so.
So the other part of it is while I was while you said the word fault, it reminded me, it sparked my memory that she was actually, I don't know if she was interviewed or somebody caught her on camera. I don't know if it was a moment where she just felt guilty, but the wife said, "This is all my fault because she's the one who told her to go down there to do the protest. Like her, it was her wife's her it was her surviving wife's idea to go down there. So she was saying, "This is my fault." Is that something that would be you if you were their attorney, would you move to keep that out of court? Oh, because it's irrelevant, or is that something that the state could argue, hey, she admitted that this is her fault?
Very good question. Guilt is a complicated emotion, and sometimes guilty feelings are warranted, and sometimes they're not. The fact that a person feels guilty about a suggestion that is so attenuated from the circumstances, I don't think is really relevant to the analysis of whether or not she is actually at fault for the officer pulling that trigger. Suggesting to go down to an area where there is suggesting to attend any protest does not be that if that were the case, anytime you went to a protest and something terrible happened, then you could say, well, it's your fault for going. It's your fault for getting into a car that day. It's your fault for, walking on that sidewalk where there's potentially ice. It's your fault for going into the hospital and letting a doctor commit malpractice on you. I mean, where do you draw the line at? I just think that, people feel guilty. People feel sad about things because they feel responsible, even at times where they're not responsible. And I don't think in this case she should have those feelings. Those should be addressed with a grief counselor, so that she can come to grips with how she feels about it.
Gotcha. And then lastly, because I think we've covered most of the angles on this. Lastly, what I was wanted to ask you, on the ICE, on the state's defense, again, if this were to go to trial, could they argue that the uh, series of events prior to even this one, could they bring in um, other attacks on ICE that have happened with like the shooting, the one of the prisoners was killed in a shooting when somebody was shooting at ICE and they ended up killing somebody who was in the van. Other rammings, like this officer was in a ramming before. Could any of those be brought to court and see like this is why they're on high alert? Um, or is that you're like you said?
No, there are federal rules of evidence that prohibit certain types of evidence from coming in, and evidence of prior incidents are not admissible because they're more what they call prejudicial than probative. They don't bear on any of the facts or issues in this particular case. Let me give you an example on the other, just putting it on the shoe on the other foot. Since September of 2025, just what, 4 months ago, 5 months ago, there have been nine shootings and nine ICE shootings, leaving five people dead. Now, if we're going to let in evidence about prior bad acts, that would, to me, would be much more detrimental to the federal government than their suggestion that they are under attack or they're under ridicule or they're being criticized or that the society and the communities that they're in they're going into are creating dangerous situations for them. None of that would be coming into a trial like this. Just like they wouldn't be able to hear about the 4 other people that ICE agents have killed in the last 4 months. The statistics are staggering. And what they suggest here, Elvis, honestly, is that this is bad policing, this is bad training, this is bad tactics, and these officers should not be on the street.
Gotcha. Alrighty, Vince. Before we wrap up, I just want to, is there any aspect of this that me as a regular citizen haven't questioned you on, like a specific perspective from you being an attorney that you'd like to share on this?
Look, we live in a dangerous world, and my advice is to turn the temperature down. Recognize that when you have a grievance, air that grievance in a court of law. You and I discussed this before we came on the program today. The streets are not a place where you adjudicate matters. That's for a courtroom. And if you have a gripe with a police officer or a federal agent, do your very best to be level-headed and not to do anything to escalate that circumstance, because we've seen now, not only at the federal level but at the state level, police officers can act incredibly violent in a very short period of time, and their fuses sometimes are very short as well, which can get someone hurt or, in this case, killed.
Absolutely. Yeah, like we were saying before the show, this time and time again, there's a lot of situations where even if you're justified in what you're arguing to a police officer is not a judge, is not a jury.
But they
But
could be an
they can't
executioner.
exactly, but they
Right.
can't quickly turn into the executioner if you try to make them judge and jury.
Right.
Uh, so I've always told everybody I've had this conversation with about any police situation, if you're right, prove it in court. They say put your hands behind your back. Just do what the officer says and argue it in court. I feel like pride is a really big thing that gets a lot of people hurt. Uh,
I do want to interject something though. Um, the advancements in civil rights have grown out of peaceful protests. I mean, Martin Luther King peacefully protested his way into a jail cell. And so there is a time and place to be defiant because society requires it. In order to effectuate change, sometimes these types of measures need to be taken. I'm not advocating for anyone to be aggressive or violent with a police officer, but there are times to be defiant. And those times have gotten us to the point we are, well, I thought we were at before George Floyd was killed, that we made these incredible advancements in civil rights because people stood up or they sat down or they laid down or they sat where they weren't supposed to. Those people are why we are here today and why things have advanced in the way that they have. And I don't want to see those things set back. And so there is a time and place for it. So I don't want to just simply say, go along and get along, because that's not how we effectuate change in this world.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the key word in there is peaceful. There was a video that I saw yesterday of this lifelong protester. I don't know his name, but he came out and he gave his 2 cents on the situation. And he was showing photos of him for over the years of being arrested. And he's like, when you are out here protesting, know that there is a line that you are crossing in order to protest. And every time that he's protested, he's like, I know I can get arrested. And when the officer says, put my hands behind my back, and he was showing pictures, I do so peacefully because that's the point. He goes, the officer is there to do their job, and you're fighting the people at the top.
Yeah.
You're not fighting Officer Smith. You're fighting the people at the top. Officer Smith is directed to arrest you because you crossed the line. Just comply with Officer Smith and make your point. But fighting, throwing stuff, and the worst case is like shooting and stuff, that is not um that is not what would affect change in a positive way. That is what leads to stronger, I think, pushback, if you
Well,
will.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to get into a historical debate here, but let's face it, this country was founded on people, um, good people who rallied against government, who who recognized the importance of the freedom of expression, the freedom of speech, the freedom to assemble. All of these are rights under the Constitution and the amendments to the Constitution. Right. And so while the police officers are certainly there to do their jobs, um, it doesn't detract from the rights that we have as citizens of this country to exercise our own rights. And that's something to keep in mind.
Absolutely. Well, Vince, this has been an insightful conversation. Congratulations on being our first Inside Trial Minds spotlight on a live active event. Thank you again for being with us on such short notice. Thank you for joining us on this special segment of Inside Trial Minds. Thank you to our guest, Vince Collela. Stay safe, stay focused, and we'll see you next time.